your backup one just in case. It's very very important.
Yes.
That I have this documented. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's also recorded.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hey, Joe.
This one. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for listening to my podcast. So I'm here with Father Herkel from Toronto's St. Michael Priory. And today I'm just here to interview him, ask him some questions to find out more about the challenges he has faced his time as a priest with the society. So to start us off, Father, could you please share the moment you felt called to the priesthood and how that calling aligned with the mission of the Society of St. Pius X?
I felt called to the priesthood as a young man in my teenage years when I met priests of the Society of St. Pius X, priests who celebrate only the traditional Latin Mass. In my earlier years, I had attended the new Mass of the Catholic Church, the Mass with the new prayers in English. And I remember in my early youth not being attracted to the priesthood, although I did serve Mass and help the priest in many things. I wasn't considering that as something I would want to do for myself. But I met priests of the Society of St. Pius X, and I saw their dedication and the importance of what they were doing. And over my teenage years, I had the grace to recognize that this was something God wanted me to do also.
That's great. So what's about the SSPX commitment to tradition that resonated with your understanding of all Catholic faith?
I think this is what really attracted me to the priesthood in the Society of St. Pius X, because the Catholic faith is expressed properly through the traditional prayers and ceremonies of the church, and is not expressed well in the modern prayers and ceremonies. And so when I saw the proper expression of the faith, especially in the prayers of the traditional Mass, I was very attracted to this. And I said, that's what Catholics are supposed to do. That's the way a Catholic priest is supposed to worship God.
Amazing. So as a priest with the society, you have obviously devoted your life to preserving all the sacred traditions of the church. So what challenges would you say that you have faced while defending these traditions in a world that often resists them?
I think the biggest challenge is the problem of people who don't understand what is happening inside of the Catholic Church and the importance of the Mass and the liturgy and the traditional prayers. It had a personal effect on me, certainly, but it's not just that it was something personal. It's something that's meant to be for all Catholics, a proper way to worship God that has been developed by the church over the centuries, but something which has its roots in the practice of the apostles. And when you look over the history of the church and you see the traditional Mass being practiced in the Latin Rite since the early days of Christianity, you see its great value. This is the Mass that made the saints. This is the way that saints prayed throughout the centuries. And now everything is different in the modern Catholic Church. The prayers were completely rewritten in the 1960s according to a more Protestant theology. And one of the great challenges and difficulties is trying to explain this to people in a proper way. Many people just don't want to hear that there could be such a problem with their Catholic Church and consider any sort of criticism of the Pope and the bishops who are promoting these changes as if it's a hatred of the Church of Christ, whereas in fact it has to be presented in the other way, and that is the challenge. It is because we love Christ and his church that we want to hold on to the traditions.
Absolutely. So how has your mission as an SSPX priest been shaped by the legacy of the founder of the society, Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre, particularly in his response to the changes, very troubling changes actually, brought by the Second Vatican Council?
So our founder, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, a French archbishop, had the grace to recognize that there was a problem in these changes of the liturgy. And during the Second Vatican Council, which happened in the early 1960s, 1962 to 65, he was an outspoken conservative, defending the traditional teachings of the church, challenging the liberals who wanted to change things. And this led to a process after the council in which the liberals had control of the Vatican. And especially in the matter of the liturgy, they rewrote the prayers of the Mass and of the other sacraments and imposed this on the whole church through the authority of the Pope. Archbishop Lefebvre had the wisdom to recognize that these changes were not a good way to profess our faith, in fact, are a danger to our faith. And he was able to start a seminary, a house of training for future priests, according to the traditional practice of the church. And we're very grateful to the Archbishop for his wisdom and the grace he had to establish the Society of St. Pius X, to preserve these traditions of the church.
Yes, that's great. So could you recount a time when your fidelity to the traditional pre-Vatican II church teachings that actually brought you into conflict with, and how you have remained steadfast to your vocation, even despite these potential conflicts?
Well, conflicts come up regularly whenever I'm meeting with a modern Catholic, someone who is Catholic, who knows something about the faith. And I say something about the faith because there's a great ignorance among most Catholics today. And you try to explain to them that they might attend a modern Catholic church, and you tell them that the prayers there are not the same as the prayers that are said in the traditional Catholic Mass. And many of them are at the point of not even understanding that that could be possible. Of course, the teachings of the Catholic Church cannot change. They are the teachings that have come to us from Christ. But the way these teachings have been expressed in our prayers, that can change. And it has changed dramatically. And it's often very difficult to convince people, especially now, 50 years after the council, that such a change has taken place. And it's necessary to encourage people to do a lot of reading and research to understand what the Catholic Church was like before Vatican II. And I've had to do that sort of reading and research in my own life because I wasn't alive before Vatican II. But I've been able to learn about what the Catholic Church did teach in the past and how this can be preserved in the future.
Yes, that's very important. So, what does the traditional Latin Mass play in shaping spiritual lives of the faithfuls? And why do you believe that it is an absolutely essential to the preservation of the Catholic identity?
I think that the Mass is the point of contact that Catholics have with their faith, the most important point of contact. Catholics must attend Mass every Sunday in order to worship God properly. And when they go to church, they see a ceremony. They participate in this ceremony by their presence, by their prayers, often by their singing or other acts of participation in the liturgy. They're doing something. They're part of something, which is our relationship with God, how we honor God and receive graces from God, especially through the sacrament of the Eucharist. In the traditional Mass, there's a very clear order. The priest stands at the altar and he faces the altar, and all the faithful are behind him, facing in the same direction. The priest is the mediator between the people and God. He is saying the prayers. He says most of the prayers on his own, but he represents the people. He's praying for them. And this is very clear in the traditional Mass. In the new Mass, the altar is usually a table, and the priest stands on one side and he faces the people across the table. And it's a very different attitude within the church. That simple positioning of the priest on one side looking at the people face to face creates a very human sort of relationship where you develop a sort of a natural affection, perhaps, for your priest. You think that he has a nice style, he has a nice presentation. It's more like a podcast than a ceremony. Too often, the priest is tempted to make up his own words and gestures to entertain the people. Whereas in the traditional Mass, things are very fixed, and the priest has a specific role to do representing the people before God. And an understanding of this has a big effect on the practice of our faith. If you recognize that you need a mediator to obtain God's graces, then you have to go to that mediator to receive the help and the guidance you need in order to save your soul. And so people come to church and they go to the priest, and a good priest directs them to the practice of confession of their sins and to the reception of the sacraments, to the proper understanding of doctrine. And he stands between the people and God at the altar. But if you don't need the priest, if he's just sort of an entertainment figure, a guiding, leading figure in the assembly, but you can approach the altar on your own and go directly to God, well, then you don't need the other things which the priest did. And we see this in practice. In the modern Catholic Church, there's been a great decline in the number of people who attend Mass. 60, 70 years ago, our attendance rates among Catholics here in Canada were around 75%. 3 out of 4 Catholics was at Mass every Sunday. Some people are sick, some people live far away for whatever reason, some people don't come. Attendance rates now in the Diocese of Toronto, I'm told that the Cardinal recently revealed that attendance rates in this diocese are around 5%. So 19 out of 20 Catholics don't come every Sunday. There's some problems. And I think the problems are basically a problem of the liturgy and the changes that come into the church. And so I'm holding on to the old way of doing things. What's next?
That's very unfortunate. So many traditional Catholics, like me, myself included, see the SSPX as a beacon of hope amidst like the modernist influences and the widespread confusion in the church. So how do you view your responsibility in safeguarding the deposit of faith that has been entrusted to you?
Well, I do have a responsibility as a priest to teach the Catholic faith in the way that it was presented in the past, and to avoid the errors, the changes that have been introduced into the teaching of the faith in the modern Catholic Church. But the primary responsibility is that of the Pope and the bishops. They are the official teachers in the church, and I only, as a priest, work as a sort of subordinate underneath them. And so I hold on to the traditional teaching. I rely on books written before the council, given the approval of the bishops at that time, as being clear statements of the Catholic teaching. And we use those sort of books for the regular catechism lessons here at the church. And in that way, we can pass on effectively what was taught to us in the past. We're not making up anything new.
That's very good to hear. So in your sacred ministry, how have you seen the connection between a personal piety, family life, to the restoration of the rest of Christian society?
Well, on a personal level, I'm very grateful that my immediate family came to the Society of St. Pius X together as a group. My parents and my one brother, we were both children living at home at the time, still quite young. And we followed the guidance of our parents when they discovered a priest who celebrated the traditional Latin Mass. And my family made that choice under my father's direction not to go back to the new Mass at our local parish church, but only to attend the Mass of the Society of St. Pius X, the traditional Latin Mass. And that was a very good influence on my family and helped to form my own vocation. And I think it was a big help to my brother and my parents as well. This applies also to other families, to other people. It's difficult if you're alone. If you're trying to keep the faith and the people that you live with don't share your faith, you're going to have constant problems, difficulties understanding people. That's why we tell people to avoid mixed marriages. A Catholic shouldn't marry a non-Catholic. You won't be able to pray together. You won't be able to do so many important things together. But if your family's united in the faith, you'll be able to support each other. And if you have the support of a traditional Catholic priest who's giving you the prayers and ceremonies and sacraments of the church in the traditional manner, you will be receiving abundant graces from God to strengthen your faith, to help you serve God well and deserve a reward in heaven.
Yes. So the history of the church is filled with countless saints and martyrs who stood firm in the face of adversity. Do you see the society's mission as part of the spiritual struggle for the preservation of the church and our faith?
Oh, yes, certainly. Every generation has to struggle for the preservation of the faith. Christ has given us his promise that he will be with us always, that his church will not fail, that the gates of hell will not prevail over his church. But that does not mean that individual members of the church, even priests and even popes, will save their souls. And each one of us must make an effort to serve God properly. And the traditional way that the church has worshiped God throughout the centuries is the proper way to serve God in the modern world.
Very true. That is very true. So looking back on your years of ministry, what has been the most rewarding aspect of serving as a priest with the society?
I think that the biggest reward that I see is the cooperation of so many good people who recognize the problems in the church today and have turned to myself and to the Society of St. Pius X for help. And I realize that my role as a priest is to give these people the sacraments in the traditional way, to lead them in their prayers in the traditional manner, to help them to save their souls. And I know that if I don't do this, there's very few other people who will do this. And so many Catholics are more or less abandoned nowadays by priests and bishops who don't seem to care about their spiritual lives. But I know that what I'm doing is of great help for the salvation of souls. And that's a consolation. And I look forward to my reward in heaven. God help me.
So if Monsignor Lefebvre, the founder of the society and the patron saint of our society, His Holiness Pope St. Pius X, were still alive today, what do you think they would say about the state of the church today and the mission that the society is doing?
Well, I think that they would approve of the work of the Society of St. Pius X. Archbishop Lefebvre, our founder of our society, died in 1991. It's not so long ago. He saw the changes that happened in the church after the Second Vatican Council, and it's been our work to carry on what Archbishop Lefebvre began, to carry on this work of training priests for the future who will celebrate the Mass of the past, as it is the Mass of all time. Archbishop Lefebvre had the special devotion to choose Pope St. Pius X as the patron of our society, because this Pope, who reigned over the church at the beginning of the 20th century, clearly identified the modern problems that have infiltrated the church. He called it the heresy of modernism, meaning that it's based on the errors of modern philosophy. I won't go into all the details of the heresy now, but Pope St. Pius X saw the beginning of this problem. And Archbishop Lefebvre saw this problem working itself out in practice as so many things changed in the Catholic Church after the Council. And I think that they would both approve of what the Society of St. Pius X is doing to preserve the traditions of the church.
Yes, I would completely agree with that. So finally, Father, to close off this interview, what advice would you give to Catholics, especially young Catholics, trying to live faithfully amidst the spiritual and many moral challenges of this modern world?
Especially for young Catholics who don't know what the church was like before the Second Vatican Council. You need to come and see the traditional Latin Mass. You need to attend this Mass, and you need to study what has happened in the church at the time of the council and afterwards with the changes in the Mass. The first problem that you face is ignorance. Many young people don't know that the way things are happening in most Catholic churches of this diocese and most dioceses of the world today is not the way things were done in the past in their grandparents' day. It's been so long that even their parents may not remember what it was like before the council. But you have an opportunity right here in Toronto to come to the Society of St. Pius X or to some other priests in the diocese to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. Come and see the difference in the liturgy. And it's something quite obvious if you just enter the church and quietly sit at the back and watch what is going on. The whole attitude of the priest is different than in the modern Catholic Mass. Then pick up some books, read the prayers, compare word for word the prayers of the traditional Latin Mass to the prayers of the modern Catholic Mass, what we call the Novus Ordo, the new order of Mass. And you'll find that so many important prayers which expressed our faith have been cut out of the new Mass. The new Mass is a greatly abrogated, shortened version of the traditional Mass. You also have to study why these changes happened. You have to read some of the books that have been written on this subject, and I will take the opportunity to recommend books available from the Angelus Press, our publishing house for the English language, particularly a book called The Catechism of the Crisis, a good starting point. And if you like podcasts, our Society of St. Pius X also has a series of podcasts on the crisis in the church that you can listen to and learn more.
Thank you very much, Father.
I'm glad to have this conversation with you, Tony.